When we think about love in times of crisis, a kind of paradox emerges. On the one hand, love is often seen as a refuge, a safe haven in the midst of turmoil. However, in times of crisis, love can become an act of rebellion, a challenge to the status quo. This happens because, in times of crisis, priorities change. Basic needs, such as security and stability, are prioritized over other things, including relationships. And this is where love can become an act of rebellion. When we choose to love, despite everything, we are choosing to go against the current, against the logic of survival. But why is this an act of rebellion? Because in times of crisis, love demands a degree of vulnerability that can be seen as a luxury we cannot afford. And yet, it is precisely this vulnerability that allows us to find a deeper connection with others. This is where love becomes an act of resistance, a way of saying that even in the midst of hopelessness, there is still a choice to be made. Furthermore, love in times of crisis can also become a form of silent protest. When we choose to love, we are choosing not to surrender to circumstances. We are choosing not to let the crisis define who we are and how we live. It is a way of saying that even if the world around us is falling apart, there is still a choice to be made, a choice that can lead us to a fuller, more authentic life. And this is where Viktor Frankl's philosophy comes into play. Frankl, who endured horrific experiences in Nazi concentration camps, knew that even in the midst of horror, there was a choice to be made. He chose to find meaning in that context, and it was that choice that allowed him to survive. And it is that choice that allows us to find love, even in times of crisis. Love in times of crisis is therefore an act of rebellion, an act of resistance, an act of silent protest. It is a choice that allows us to go against the grain, to find meaning and connection in the midst of hopelessness. And it is this choice that allows us to find a fuller, more authentic life, even in the midst of crisis. The search for meaning in the midst of suffering is one of the greatest challenges we face on our journey through life. It is easy to find meaning when things are going well, when we are surrounded by love, health, and prosperity. However, it is when pain, loss, and adversity come knocking at our door that the search for meaning becomes a truly Herculean challenge. Viktor Frankl, one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century, knew a lot about suffering. He spent 3 years in Nazi concentration camps during World War II, where he lost his family and friends. However, it was precisely in this environment of horror and inhumanity that Frankl found an opportunity to reflect on what it was that gave meaning to human life. And that is how he developed his theory about the search for meaning in the midst of suffering. For Frankl, the search for meaning is not something that can be found in a formula or a ready-made recipe. Instead, it is a process that requires courage, determination, and a willingness to face reality, even when it is harsh and cruel. We must be willing to question our own values and beliefs, to reflect on our goals, and to find a purpose that goes beyond our own interests. One of the biggest obstacles we face when seeking meaning in the midst of suffering is the loss of control. When we're facing a crisis or adversity, it's easy to feel like we're at the mercy of our circumstances. However, Frankl reminds us that even when we can't control our circumstances, we can control our attitude toward them. We can choose how we react, how we deal with our pain, and how we find a way forward. The search for meaning in the midst of suffering also requires a great deal of humility. It requires recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that we don't know everything we need to know. It requires being willing to learn, to grow, and to develop, even when pain and loss are very present. It requires being willing to surrender to the unknown, to surrender to life, and to trust that even when we can't see a clear path, there is a greater purpose at play. Ultimately, The search for meaning in the midst of suffering is a process that requires patience and perseverance. It is not something we can achieve overnight. It is a process that takes time, effort, and dedication. You have to be willing to take it one step at a time, to face the obstacles that arise along the way, and to find a way to move forward, even when pain and loss are very present. You have to be willing to get back up, to pick yourself up, and to get back on the path to finding meaning. Viktor Frankl's experience in the concentration camps is a dark chapter in the history of humanity, but also a living testament to the human capacity for resilience and resilience. In 1942, Frankl, a young Austrian doctor, was deported to the Theresienstadt concentration camp along with his wife and parents. However, it was in Auschwitz, where he was later transferred, that he experienced hell on earth. In this place of horror, Frankl witnessed the most brutal and systematic degradation of human dignity. He saw how the Nazis, with their regime of terror and humiliation, tried to break the spirit of the prisoners, reducing them to mere numbers tattooed on their skin. However, even in the face of such atrocity, Frankl did not lose faith in their humanity. He continued to practice his profession as a doctor, helping other prisoners, including performing surgeries in precarious conditions. But it was precisely in this environment of despair that Frankl discovered what he called the three avenues of escape: work, art, and love. He realized that even in the midst of suffering, prisoners who found greater meaning in their lives, whether through work, artistic creation, or love for others, were able to keep a flame of hope alive. This flame was what kept them from surrendering to despair and dehumanization. Frankl also developed a theory called Logotherapy, which seeks to find meaning in life in three dimensions: work, experience, and attitude. He believed that even in extreme situations, such as those experienced in concentration camps, it was possible to find a greater meaning, a purpose that transcended suffering. And it was this theory that allowed him to find meaning in his own experience, even when everything around him seemed meaningless. Frankl's experience in the concentration camps is a testament to the fact that even in the most adverse circumstances, humanity can be kept alive. It is a reminder that even when all seems lost, there is always a choice to be made, an attitude to be taken, a meaning to be found. And it is this choice, this attitude, and this meaning that can transform suffering into an opportunity for growth and overcoming. When we think of freedom of choice, the idea of having options, of being able to decide between different paths, automatically comes to mind. However, Viktor Frankl shows us that freedom of choice is not just about having options, but about how we choose to react in the face of adversity. It is precisely in these moments of crisis that freedom of choice becomes most important, because this is when we can choose how we will react, how we will deal with pain, loss, and uncertainty. Frankl makes us reflect on how, even in extreme situations, such as concentration camps, there was a choice to be made, choosing how to react to suffering, choosing how to maintain dignity, choosing how to find purpose. And it is precisely this choice that allows us to find meaning, even in the midst of chaos. It is the choice that allows us to find a reason to continue, to fight, to resist. But how do we make this choice in the face of adversity? How do we choose between anger and resignation? How do we choose between hopelessness and despair? This is where awareness comes into play. The awareness that we can choose, that we can decide how we will react. The awareness that we are not victims of circumstances, but rather active agents who can shape our destiny. And it is precisely this awareness that allows us to find freedom of choice, even in situations that seem to have no way out. Furthermore, Frankl shows us that freedom of choice is not just an individual choice, but also a choice that can inspire others. When we choose to respond positively to adversity, when we choose to find meaning in suffering, we are also choosing to inspire others to do the same. We are choosing to be a light in the midst of darkness. We are choosing to be an example of resilience and hope. And it is precisely this choice that can change the course of history. It is this choice that can inspire movements, that can change lives, that can create a positive impact on the world. It is this choice that allows us to find true meaning in life, even in the face of adversity. It is this choice that allows us to find freedom of choice, even when it seems like there is no choice. When we think of love, we often imagine it as a soft, warm, and welcoming feeling. However, Viktor Frankl presents us with a deeper and more revolutionary vision of love as a form of resistance against oppression. For Frankl, love is not just a feeling, but a choice, an attitude, a way of positioning oneself in life, even in the most difficult situations. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl recounts his experiences in Nazi concentration camps during World War II. In these places, humanity was constantly dehumanized, and prisoners were subjected to inhumane conditions. However, it was precisely in these environments that Frankl discovered the power of love as a form of resistance. He saw how prisoners who focused on helping each other, sharing what little they had, showing compassion and empathy, were able to maintain dignity and humanity even in the face of the most brutal oppression. Love, in this sense, is not just a romantic feeling, but a way of connecting with others, of feeling part of a community, of a family. This was especially important in the concentration camps, where loneliness and isolation were powerful weapons used by the Nazis to break the spirit of the prisoners. By connecting with others, the prisoners found the strength to keep resisting, to keep fighting for their lives. But love as a form of resistance is not just a strategy for surviving extreme situations. It is a choice we can make in our daily lives. When we choose to love, we also choose not to surrender to the forces that seek to control and oppress us. We choose not to give in to fear, anger, and hatred. We choose instead to connect with others, with life, and with ourselves. We choose to find meaning and purpose in our lives, even in the most difficult situations. And that is precisely what makes love a form of rebellion. When we love, we are saying that we do not accept the conditions imposed on us. We are saying that we will not surrender to the forces that seek to control us. We are choosing to create our own meaning, our own truth. And that is an act of courage, of resistance, and of freedom. When we find ourselves in the midst of a crisis, whether personal or collective, it is common to feel powerless and helpless. The feeling of loss of control can lead us to look for someone to blame, whether it is others, the system, or circumstances. However, Viktor Frankl teaches us that it is precisely in these moments that individual responsibility becomes more crucial than ever. Rather than surrendering to victimhood, we must remember that choice always exists, even if it is only the choice of how we will react to circumstances. It is in this sense that individual responsibility becomes an act of rebellion, a way of saying no to resignation and yes to the possibility of creating change. But how can we exercise this individual responsibility in times of crisis? First, it's crucial to recognize that crises are opportunities for growth and change. Rather than clinging to the past, we can use the crisis as a chance to reevaluate our values and priorities. This allows us to find a deeper, more meaningful purpose that gives us strength and direction in the midst of turmoil. Additionally, individual accountability also means acknowledging our own mistakes and shortcomings. Instead of shifting blame, we can look in the mirror and ask, what could I have done differently? This honest introspection can lead us to greater awareness of our thought and behavior patterns, allowing us to make changes that can help prevent future crises. Finally, individual responsibility in times of crisis also means recognizing our interconnectedness with others. Rather than becoming isolated in our own needs and fears, we can look for ways to help others, even in small ways. This can be as simple as offering a supportive word or a practical help, or it can be more complex, such as working on projects that benefit the community. By exercising individual responsibility in times of crisis, we are not only finding a way out of our own situation, but we are also helping to create a more positive and compassionate environment around us. And it is precisely this combination of individual responsibility and connection with others that can give us the strength and resilience needed to face crises with courage and determination. The connection between love and core values is one of the most profound and revolutionary concepts presented by Viktor Frankl in his work. For Frankl, love is not just a romantic feeling or an intense emotion, but rather a conscious and deliberate choice that allows us to connect with something greater than ourselves. And it is precisely this choice that allows us to access the core values that give meaning to our lives. When we love, we are choosing to value something or someone above our own desires and interests. We are choosing to prioritize the well-being of another person, or a cause, or an idea above our own needs and desires. And it is this choice that allows us to transcend our ego and connect with something broader and deeper. It is this choice that allows us to find a broader meaning in our lives, a meaning that goes beyond our own needs and desires. But what are these fundamental values that love allows us to access? For Frankl, these values are the values of human dignity, freedom, solidarity, justice, and compassion. They are the values that allow us to live an authentic life, a life that is true to ourselves and to others. They are the values that allow us to find a broader purpose for our lives, a purpose that goes beyond our own needs and desires. And it is precisely this connection between love and core values that allows us to find a broader meaning in our lives. When we love, we are choosing to prioritize these values above all else. We are choosing to live a life that is true to ourselves and to others. We are choosing to find a broader purpose in our lives, a purpose that goes beyond our own needs and desires. And it is this choice that allows us to find a broader meaning in our lives, a meaning that goes beyond our own needs and desires. But how can we cultivate this connection between love and core values in our lives? How can we choose to prioritize these values above all else? For Frankl, the answer is simple. We must choose to love. We must choose to value others, to value life, to value human dignity. We must choose to find a broader purpose for our lives, a purpose that goes beyond our own needs and desires. And it is this choice that allows us to find a broader meaning for our lives, a meaning that goes beyond our own needs and desires. When we think of love, we usually associate it with romantic feelings, tenderness and care. However, Viktor Frankl, the famous Austrian psychiatrist, presents us with a deeper and more revolutionary perspective on love. For Frankl, love is not just a feeling, but a form of resistance, an act of rebellion against the absurdity of existence. In his work, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl tells us about his experiences in Nazi concentration camps during World War II. It is in this context of suffering and hopelessness that Frankl discovers the power of love as a source of meaning. He realizes that even in the midst of horror and dehumanization, prisoners who kept love alive in their hearts were able to find purpose, a reason to continue living. Love, in this sense, is not just a feeling directed toward another person, but a conscious choice to value life, to find meaning in the midst of absurdity. It is love that allows us to find a purpose greater than our own existence, a purpose that transcends our individual lives. It is love that allows us to find meaning in a world that often seems meaningless. But how does this work? How can love be a source of meaning in an otherwise absurd existence? The answer lies in love's ability to connect us to something greater than ourselves. When we love, we are connected to another person, to a community, to a cause, to an ideal. This connection allows us to transcend our own existence and find a purpose that goes beyond our individual needs and desires. Furthermore, love also allows us to find meaning in the midst of pain and suffering. When we are faced with loss or a difficult situation, it is love that allows us to find purpose, a reason to continue living. It is love that allows us to find meaning in the midst of pain and suffering. In an absurd existence, love becomes an act of rebellion, a form of resistance against meaninglessness and hopelessness. It is love that allows us to find a purpose greater than our own existence, a purpose that transcends our individual lives. It is love that allows us to find meaning in a world that often seems meaningless. Love can be an act of rebellion in the face of indifference and nihilism, because choosing to love means choosing meaning in a world that often presents us with a lack of it. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, knew this all too well. He saw how indifference and nihilism can lead people to lose their humanity, and how love can be the only form of resistance against these destructive forces. When we love, we are choosing to see value in another human being, in their story, their dreams, and their pain. We are choosing to believe that this person matters, that their life has meaning, and that their presence in the world makes a difference. This is especially revolutionary in a world that often presents us with meaninglessness, where people are seen as mere statistics or disposable objects. Indifference is one of the main forces that lead us to lose our humanity. When we become indifferent, we begin to see people as objects rather than as human beings with feelings, dreams, and pain. Indifference leads us to lose empathy, compassion, and solidarity. And that is precisely where love comes into play as an act of rebellion. Love means choosing to care, choosing to connect with others, and choosing to see value in them. Nihilism, on the other hand, is the belief that life has no meaning. It is the belief that there is no purpose, that there is no reason to care about anything. But love is living proof that nihilism is wrong. When we love, we are creating meaning. We are creating purpose. We are choosing to believe that life has value and that the people around us have value. Love is an act of rebellion, because choosing to love means choosing to oppose indifference and nihilism. It means choosing to care in a world that so often presents us with meaninglessness. It means choosing to see value in another human being, in their story, in their dreams, and in their pain. And that's what Viktor Frankl wanted us to understand. He wanted us to understand that love is the key to finding meaning in a world that so often presents us with meaninglessness. Transforming suffering into an opportunity for personal growth is one of the main pillars of the philosophy of Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust. Frankl believed that instead of surrendering to suffering, we can transform it into an opportunity to discover our purpose and find meaning in our lives. For Frankl, suffering is not something to be avoided at all costs, but rather an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. He argued that when we face challenges and difficulties, we have a choice of two ways to respond. We can either surrender to suffering and allow it to define us, or we can use these challenges as an opportunity to grow and develop. Frankl himself experienced intense suffering during the Holocaust, where he lost his wife and other family members. However, instead of giving in to the pain and despair, he found a way to turn his experience into something positive. He began helping other prisoners in the concentration camp, sharing his food, and offering emotional support. In doing so, Frankl discovered that even in the midst of the most intense suffering, it is possible to find purpose and meaning. This is the key to turning suffering into an opportunity for personal growth, finding a purpose greater than the suffering itself. When we are focused on our own suffering, it is easy to feel like a victim and lose perspective. But when we find a greater purpose, we can begin to see suffering as an opportunity to grow and develop. Furthermore, Frankl also believed that suffering can be an opportunity to discover our deepest values. When we are comfortable and secure, it is easy to forget our values and purpose. But when we face challenges and hardships, we are forced to reflect on what truly matters to us. This can lead to greater clarity and understanding of our values and goals, which in turn can lead to a more fulfilling and satisfying life. Ultimately, transforming suffering into an opportunity for personal growth is a choice. It is a choice that requires courage, determination, and a willingness to find meaning in our lives, even in the midst of suffering. It is a choice that can lead to a fuller, more meaningful, and happier life. And in that moment, we reach the heart of the paradox. Love, that force that moves mountains, becomes an act of rebellion in times of crisis. It is the choice to resist oppression, to find meaning in suffering, to transform adversity into an opportunity for growth. It is the freedom of choice that allows us to hold our heads high, look indifference and nihilism in the eye, and say, I choose to love, I choose meaning, I choose to live. And that is where Viktor Frankl's message reaches us. Love is not just a feeling, it is a choice, it is a form of resistance, it is a way of finding meaning in the midst of absurdity. It is the rebellion of love that allows us to transform suffering into an opportunity for growth, that allows us to find light in the midst of darkness. So when love becomes an act of rebellion, it is not just a choice, it is a necessity. It is the need to find meaning in times of crisis. It is the need to resist oppression. It is the need to live. And that is where we find true freedom. The freedom to choose to love, the freedom to choose to live, the freedom to choose meaning. It is not just a choice, it is a revolution. It is the revolution of love, the revolution of hope, the revolution of life. And that is where we find the true meaning of existence, not in avoiding suffering, but in transforming it into an opportunity for growth, not in running away from adversity, but in finding light in the midst of darkness, not in surrendering to indifference, but in choosing to love, choosing meaning, choosing to live. Now that you've discovered how love can become an act of rebellion, it's time to join the revolution. Leave your comment below and share with us how you believe love can be an instrument of change in your life and in the world. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive more inspiring and thought-provoking content. Together, we can create a movement that celebrates the transformative power of love and compassion. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey.